Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge and welcome to Season 6, Episode 4 of Outlander, Hour of the Wolf. This is going to be my recap and, comparison to the book for this episode. I just wanted to give a heads up. I'm sorry if I seem a little low energy for this one. I've not been feeling super great today, but while I was gonna wait to film, I realized that I really want to talk about this episode and that it would actually make me feel better to do it. But pardon me if I'm a little less enthusiastic than normal. It's just how life goes. I'm okay. I'm just a little worn out, and so it starts to wear on you. But I did not want that to get in the way of talking about this episode because this episode had some wonderful book content, some very touching content, also a little bit of triggering content. If you're someone who watches my normal channel, which is a, romance book recommendations, that's what I do. I review and recommend books to people. Something that we mention often is triggers. These are often seen as they can be content warnings in front of a TV show. They can be trigger warnings or an author's note at the beginning of a book. And this one definitely has those. And I'm sure if you watched it, you're aware that this episode speaks about loss of children to miscarriage at different points, as well as, the grief of that. And yeah, there's some pretty heavy topics in this one, and I feel like, as Outlander does, and I can think of some specific episodes from our past, right? We have Wentworth Prison, we have the finale of last season, we have the episode when Bree is raped by Stephen Bonnet. We have these episodes that have very hefty, as I've said, triggers or themes to them. And I feel that the show handles them with dignity and the respect that they deserve, in my opinion. And I feel that it can open up some very intense but important conversations. So anyway, we're jumping ahead, but just wanted to mention that because I do know that there are some of you who watch my videos because they don't plan on reading the books, but they like my opinion on the show. I also have some viewers who are overseas and won't even get to watch the show until later on. So I like to, provide those trigger warnings. I'm going to be talking about some pretty intense topics. So, all right, so we have Hour of the Wolf, and this episode features very heavily the Cherokee and Mohawk. We have Jamie and Ian. Why not say Jamie? Oh, my ill health must be affecting my brain today. Don't mind that. And so we get to see them fulfilling their duties of Indian agent. But we start before the opening credits with a cold open that is a flashback to Ian. In the last time on Outlander, we knew that this was coming because it re-showed Ian and him running the gauntlet at the end of season 4. And when we now get to see the direct aftermath of that. So in the part before the credits, we see this flashback of Ian making it through the gauntlet, and then he's getting adopted into the Mohawk, and they shave his head and they give him a new name, and they do this little ceremony where they say some words that are a lot like the Scottish marriage vows. It says, "You are blood of our blood and bone of our bone. You are now our son. You're adopted into our family." And I wrote in my notes that this was almost like a marriage ceremony to some degree, which I thought it was very cool. And for Ian, you can see that obviously he is torn about this, but it wasn't what he expected. He's very welcomed into them, And that goes to show that though Roger was not able to run the gauntlet, had he been able to do that, he would have been welcomed in to the community as well, right? That was not how it worked out for him, but it did for Ian. So then we go back to present time, and we have a little bit of sexy morning time with Claire and Jamie in bed, which is ruined by a sneezing McDonald being allergic to ADSO and sneezing it up and waking up the house, which is, it's funny. It's funny. And I love the little banter between Jamie and Claire, more like book banter too, where he's like, I wish I could take you again. Maybe in a little bit. Like, I just always love when we point out Jamie's virility, or when he realizes he's not as young as he used to be. It's all good stuff for me. So then we have Jamie giving a job to Fergus, and Fergus seems pretty subdued, but also very thankful that Jamie is finding work for him to feel useful. And Jamie says too, he's like, it's clear that yes, this is a job to get him out of the situation that he's in, but also it is work that needs to be done. And so this isn't just a pity job or just busy work, like it's stuff that needs to be done. And he's bringing things to River Run, and he's going to be kind of like their supply person for now. And I like that. It is great. Fergus is going to have work to do. This isn't quite book accurate yet. I feel like we will get Fergus to that place eventually. But I think though, no, I maybe am jumping ahead in my mind too, because there are other jobs that like Jamie has Fergus do. He is kind of like a liaison back and forth. Whereas like when there is building and planting time, like other fully two-handed men are needed for those things, and he can't send someone to do this. And Fergus, who is his right-hand man, he can do these things, and it's not taking away from something else that's happening at the Ridge. So it is a good thing. So we have weapons training kind of happening. Roger showing that he's gotten better with a gun, which is kind of cute. Again, I love getting to see Roger, doing more and like improving in in the skills that he has to be a, 18th century man, whatever the time period is, 18th century, yeah. And yeah, I like getting to see that. But Bree, she's not having it, and she kind of walks off, and Jamie goes and is like, what's the matter? And she explains about the Trail of Tears, and that it's going to happen in 60 years, and she explains what will happen to the natives, and that the people that they have worked with will totally disregard their sacred lands and their rights to the land that they live on, and about the Trail of Tears. Also, McDonald, I forgot to mention this, he tells Jamie that they need Bird to swear an oath to the king. So Jamie's like, okay. So then we have Jamie and Ian arriving at the Cherokee, and there are some Mohawk men there. And specifically, we see a man we've seen in season 4. Yeah, who we've seen in season 4 when, there was that stuff with Roger. And Ian seems very upset to see them there. And so now it's time for a story time. And this is going to be a big chunk that is Ian telling his story to Jamie. And we get this extended flashback. And I have to say that I feel like this is kind of like all of his story being compressed into one, which I don't have any problem with. These are bits and pieces we found out about Ian at different times. The bulk of this story, I believe he tells to Bree. I was trying to rack my mind back because there's this important trip that Bree and Ian go on together in A Breath of Snow and Ashes, where I believe they're going to, is it a like mammoth skull or like mammoth skeleton? There's something that they go see together, and they really are able to like connect with each other. And Ian shares a lot of his story about what we're going to talk about with Bree. And it's this very like interesting interaction between them, and I really, really love that. I love their connection with that. He also shares some of this with Claire about what happened to his child, and Claire, you know, has some things that she tells him, which I don't want to say just in case we get to that. But my point being, I don't mind that they had this all in one chunk and that it was told to Jamie. Like, I don't have a problem with this. I just wanted to see Ian's story, and man, does John Bell do an amazing job. And obviously we're going to go through it beat by beat, but I was just so impressed. This is like such a great job of showing the progression that Ian has went through, and how he went from, you know, kind of this carefree, you know, young man who, I mean, not completely carefree because he had been assaulted by Galus at this time and he'd lived through that, but it was just another thing that shed a lot of his childhood when he goes through this situation. And it also, in my opinion, even though, and I talked about this last season when I did the episode, when Ian attempts suicide in season 5, which I did not like. I was like, why are we doing this? However, I feel like the way that they show this flashback and just how much pain Ian is in, you know, that attempted suicide, that happens very soon after he returns. You know, he hasn't been back for long when he goes on that trip with Roger. I think it's in the same like week that he's back or something. And so we now have context too of like what would have driven Ian to do that. Again, don't agree with the show that he would do that, because Ian still feeling torn even between like Catholicism and, you know, the Mohawk way. I just don't believe he would commit suicide, because then any hope he did have of being with his lost children, like, he wouldn't have that in his mind, you know? So, but either way, I feel like this character arc they show of him really gives context to that scene, you know? Even though I don't agree with it, I feel like they've made the case for why that happens now that we have this backstory. So, okay, let's get into the backstory. Sorry, you know I ramble. I was going to be on point with this, but as soon as I start talking about it, I get excited. So, we have Jamie explaining about Emily, and I won't try to say her name either, just like he won't. But there's this beautiful Mohawk woman who, in this flashback, she gives him a little wolf figure, like wolf head figurine. Oh, his name, I forgot to say that. They gave him a new name, and I didn't say what it was. Wolf's brother is the name that they give him, because, you know, he has, how did I just forget the dog's name? Oh my God, the dog's name just went out of my head. I forgot it. I'm so sorry. But anyway, because the dog's with him, it will pop back in my head in this review. You'll see. And so she gives it to him, and then we see him hunting with that Mohawk fighter, who I don't remember his name. I didn't write that one down. But they're become friends. And they talk a little bit about how that Mohawk, he was in love with the woman who had killed herself at the end of season 4, and that his family had adopted the child that she'd had. And he talks about, like, are you in love with someone else? And he's like, no, I don't think I will be. And he's like, well, are you going to pick someone? And the man says, we don't pick, the women do. And he taps the figurine that Ian is wearing, the carving that Ian is wearing. And Ian realizes that that was Emily kind of claiming him. So we see him with Emily, and now we see her calling him husband, and we see this love scene between them, which I wrote in my notes. It was hard to watch this because it felt very like awkward to see, like, I don't know, John Bell in my head is just this very like young guy. Like, I know he's not, but there was just something about it. But it starts so awkward, but they're so sweet together. Like, there was this innocent, sweet beauty between them in this love scene. And like, I totally choked up. I could choke myself up right now. Because it's like, you just know that it's a tragedy that's about to unfold, you know. But they were so beautiful together. And I do say in my notes, I was like, this is where specifically the timeline of the show gets a bit squeaky for me. It gets a bit squeaky for me. Because the amount of time that Ian was gone in season 5, because right, he's gone from the end of season 5, or the end of season 4, and then he comes back just a little over midway through season 5. And like, Jemmy is literally still a baby in this, right? So Jemmy is born while him and Jamie and Claire are on their way. And Jemmy is like still, you know, he's not even a year old really when Ian's back. And in the books, I believe he's gone for almost 2 years. Someone can correct me. I would need to look up the time he's gone, because I know that I made a note of it in my book. I know I made a note how long he was gone. But for them to have like been married, because, you know, he didn't immediately marry Emily when he was there, and then for them to be pregnant and her to have been, I think in the book she's like 5 or 6 months along with baby Isabel, and then they get pregnant. In the show, I think they show it one more time, but in the book, it's 2 more times that they lose pregnancies. So in total, they've lost 3. That happens over the course of like a year and a half where the children are lost. And total, I think he's gone just a little over 2 years or so. So this, I just wrote like, this is where the timeline gets a little bit squeaky for me, because I always did feel like they rushed returning John Bell. But I understand, again, this is the thing where like when you're dealing with TV shows, it's the same reason that like keeping Lord John available to be in episodes. I mean, we'll talk about Lord John in a minute. It's hard to keep an actor just on retainer for you to use them just like once a season, you know? So to have kept John Bell, for him to just keep his schedule open when he's not going to be used much, like that's a lot to ask for an actor who, like, you know, they need to make money. So I was okay with him being brought back. It's just now when we're telling this story of heartbreak, it's very much condensed down. But putting that aside, focusing on the show, it does not lessen the impact when I'm watching this unfold. It does not lessen the heartbreak of them expecting a child and then waking up to the blood and then the baby not being, you know, fully ready, and then them losing another child, and then Emily deciding that she's going to divorce him, which is something that a Mohawk woman can do, and just kind of kick him out of her home, basically. Because the way that it's explained in the book, I'm sure Diana did her research, but I'm just going off of the book explanation for it, not necessarily history, is that the woman makes her home, you know, her tent, and she invites a man to be in it, and she has the right to turn him away. And so we have him being sent away by one of the elder women, and they give him some food and water, and they tell him, we believe that for a man's seed to take root, his spirit must overpower hers. And though you've been adopted into the Mohawk family, your spirit is not Mohawk, and your spirit is not strong enough. And Ian is like, that's just an excuse. Like, you guys have adopted me. Like, I'm here. And she's like, Emily doesn't want to see you anymore. And so that's when he leaves. And that is the flashback that we see of him. I thought this was amazingly well acted. As I said, the chemistry between them, the love between them was so well acted. Like, this was agonizing to watch. I was crying pretty much the whole time. Like, I'm a big baby. I could bring myself to full weeping tears about it right now, because I feel like it was done so well. It was so beautiful, and you could just tell how much he loved her, and you could see what he meant now when he told Marcelly that Fergus is grieving too. Even though his came out in drunkenness and anger, he's grieving, you know, what he feels like is something he didn't protect her from. And that is not just saying that like he's grieving having a child that isn't perfect. No, it's him grieving that he believes his actions are the reason that his son has this, you know, I don't even want to use a word because I don't want to call it a deformity or disease. That's not what it is. But that's how Fergus sees it, is that it's his fault, that he wasn't a protector, that he's only half of a man, and that is why bad things have happened to his family. It's not because he wants to hold it against his child. It's because he holds it against himself. And so that puts into context what Ian says to Marcelly, because it's like he's grieving and he feels, you know, like he did something wrong. Because that's how Ian felt too, you know, that they just weren't compatible or something like that. So I really hope we will get a follow-up scene where maybe Jamie, we don't see Jamie tell her, but like, you know, we'll get there. But like at the end when Jamie is like, I'll tell you it, but not right now. And then there's what happens. If Jamie will tell Claire about it, and then Claire is like, this is most likely what went wrong, is that you two just like aren't compatible or whatever. We'll see if that happens. But then we go back to the present and we have Jamie, you know, kind of empathizing with Ian about the loss of a child, because that happened to him too. Then we have Alexander Cameron, who is another agent to the Cherokee, but to like a different tribe of them. He seems cool at first. He's getting really drunk though. Not super great. Then we go back to the ridge and we have testing out the ether. So we are told we have Joe and Lizzie. So we have Joe, Beardsley, and Lizzie, and they're testing the ether, and Malva is helping. Malva continues to be super creepy, and I just am starting to feel like I don't like the level of creep they're putting into her. Like, I just don't think that it needs to be so spread on so thick, because like every other word she says is a like, my father says this, my father says that. Now, I know I've read in the comments that some people who read the books felt that way about Malva the whole time, and that is completely legitimate. I never did. Like, stuff that is coming up with Malva, I had no clue. Like, I mean, I knew that she was a little, like, maybe being promiscuous, which I don't consider, like, I don't automatically think that person is bad because they're promiscuous, right? That would be slut-shaming or something like that, you know? But I just feel like the way this actress plays her is that she literally is so creepy. But anyway, we test out the ether and it works. And Malva says, like, only God has the right to do this. Maybe my father is right. He would be very upset. And Claire is like, well, maybe we shouldn't tell him, huh? And she's like, yeah, he would stop me from coming. And we're like, okay. So then we go back to the Native Americans and we have them giving over the guns. And then we see Ian has some anger, and he finds out that I think he gets to talk to one of the men who wasn't his like brother friend guy, and he finds out that Emily has a son with her new mate, which was his friend, and they get into a fight. And then that fight leads what's his name, Alexander Cameron, to get to fighting with the native, and now he challenges him to a duel. So they are going to duel with pistols, and everything's escalated quite quickly. So then we have Ian talking with Jamie again, and he says that he never got to see his daughter, but he named her Isabel, and that she wasn't even baptized or given a name, but he named her that. And he asked, like, was I being punished because you know, because I am a pagan, you know, I was living with pagans, I married a pagan, like, you know, he's questioning all this, and Jamie tells him, he's like, God has a plan for this, you know, and, sorry, crap. And Ian doesn't know the purpose, and I just want to put this out there now. I'm going to give you a bit of a spoiler. I'm just going to say one name. I'm going to say Rachel. I'm going to say this name. I hope we get to meet her soon. Probably not this season. But God does have a plan for Ian in the books. Okay. And thy name is Rachel. So we'll say that. But, you know, Jamie says, he's like, the same thing happened to me. I never got to see my daughter Faith. And, you know, God, I'm sorry. It's hard to get through. And he says that after life comes death, and then the Lord shall bring us all home. And he's like, let us pray together now, and we'll pray that my daughter Faith will look for your daughter in heaven. So that had me sobbing. As you can see, it does right now. I knew this one would be tough, guys. Okay, I knew it would be tough because it's amazing. And this is lots of men being emotional and like vulnerable with each other, and I can't handle it, okay? Because it's so much of things that I love about the books is these emotional moments between men. I feel like Diana puts them in very often, and they're so touching when we see these tender moments between men who love each other, who care so deeply for each other, and they're able to like be there for each other when they're in pain, and it just does stuff to me. So anyway, we have Ian going to visit his friend now, and he gives him Jamie's pistol to use in the duel, and he is like, I forgive you for this. And the friend says, if something happens to me, please go take care of my son and of Emily. And Ian's like, you're gonna be fine. You know, like, that's a lot to ask. Then Bird comes to talk to Jamie, and he says, we will fight with the king. I'm ready to give like my oath, like we will be available to help him. And Jamie asks to talk with him in private. And Jamie, they go into Bird's tent, and he shares what Bree shared with him, but in, you know, a covert way. He says, the women in my family, they have the sight. They have been told these things. They've said that in 60 years' time, your people will be moved, you know, and he's like, tell your descendants this is going to happen so that they can be ready. And Bird is like, what can we do? And he's like, well, you and your family can leave and hide. You won't be able to stop it for everybody, but you can protect your family. And Bird says, we will fight for ourselves. And I will, you know, I'll tell the generations to do this. And Bird says, this wife you have, did you have to pay a great deal for her? And Jamie says, she cost almost everything I have, but she was worth it. Love it. So then we have the weird little duel. I don't have time to say about this. The guy is basically going to cheat and try to shoot the other guy in the back, and Jamie stops it, or Ian stops it from happening. And then this is when he tells him, I forgive you. And Ian tells him that God chose you to be with Emily and to be her husband, and that's really like beautiful thing. And then Ian goes to the river, and he takes off his wolf amulet, his carving, and he puts it in the river, and he lets it go. And then he speaks with Jamie, and Jamie's like, or Ian's like, I don't know who I am. I don't know if I'm Mohawk or if I'm Scottish or who I am. And Ian tells him, he's like, I've been many things. But it's not important about what people call you. It's about who you are inside. And you can be both. You can be both Mohawk and part of my family. You know, it's about who you are inside. And I thought that was great. Then we get a scene where we get to see Kezzy and Lizzie now. they're very particular to like tell you the names because obviously this is played by one person, so we have to be able to tell them apart. Then we have Claire and Malva cleaning up the surgery, and Claire is working in her case book, and she does drawings of the different surgeries and the different injuries, and she takes notes on them, and she also has her different medicines written in there, like different, healing things she's tried. And Malva is questioning her about it, and Claire's explaining, she's like, well, not every person, like, no two people are the same, so, each surgery I do, each thing that I treat, like, it's going to be different for everyone, so I try to catalog everything, and then, when it's time to pass that on to someone, they will better be able to help other people, And so she lets Malva look at it, and Malva's like, my brother thought this was full of spells, and I can see that it's not. This is good stuff. And then we see Jamie coming back, and so Claire's like, would you finish cleaning up? And Malva's like, sure. And so Claire goes out to meet Jamie. Jamie says that he's tired, and Jamie, this is like, this again comes from like how much time is condensed, because Jamie says he's tired, he doesn't want to talk about everything right now, and he's like, I can't be part of both. I think, what does he say? He says it's time to change horses now. So we have a feeling now he's going to be switching to the revolutionary side. So there we go. And then they start having sexy time. And the last scene we see is them starting to go at it. And Malva is watching them have sex. So that's not creepy at all. So that was the end of this episode. Again, I feel like I've shared this throughout. Like, this is another episode of like 99% purely book content. Again, the timeline is still the thing that is the most messed up. The, amount of time he's gone, we just kind of forget that they only had him be gone for like 5 months or something like that. At a max, he was maybe gone a year. But that's not what the show shows us. But that's okay. That's okay. I also, like, not to make this, any more triggering than it needs to be, but I've also had friends who they've lost a pregnancy, and within 40 days they were pregnant again, lost it again, and then 2 months later they were pregnant and carried that all the way through. So they had 3 pregnancies within, like, a year's time, technically. So that can happen. But again, the show has definitely condensed the time for them. So yeah, I thought this was, again, obviously this was a very emotional one. It was heart-wrenching. It wasn't like fun to watch. I don't think much this season has been fun. I mean, let's be real. Outlander itself is not a super like fun show to watch or funny, but it is, it's so many things. It's so many things. It gives me all the feelings. Then in the preview for next week, Lord John is going to be back, as I briefly mentioned earlier, and we were seeing a bit of progression possibly in what is Malva up to. There were some interesting shots of her. There is supposedly a love charm that was burnt as a like sacrifice on the ground. Who's that for? What's going on with that? Which they do need to progress that story if they're going to, because we are officially halfway through the season already, which is crazy. 4 episodes and we're halfway in. But again, I feel like we have covered a lot of ground in the 4 episodes, and I'm very impressed that we've done that. Where I do potentially see things diverting the most is with the Malva storyline. Not necessarily about what happens, but like how it plays out. Because how it plays out in the book is very complicated and gory and intense, and there's a lot, and there's also still, what will happen with Roger and Bree. Like, are they going to try to fit all the way to the end of book 6 in this, or will we end it a bit sooner? I'm very intrigued to see that. Like, I don't know, because I think pretty much all the things that I thought were going to happen this season, I've seen them now. I don't know what's coming in these back 4 episodes, but it's very intriguing to me. So yeah, this was another great episode for me. I really again, it wasn't super enjoyable, but it felt like I was watching a lot of scenes from the book. I was very impressed with John Bell's acting. One of the things that I've shared when I've talked about him before is that John Bell is not the swoony Ian that I love from the books. Like, he's just not how I picture Ian. He's not that. But his acting in this episode and his, like, the expressions of his face and the emotions that you just feel off of him, it really sucks me in, you know? And as I say, like, book young Ian, he's always going to be there for me. He's always going to be there for me. And I think John Bell is doing an amazing job, like, portraying him. Anyway, okay, we'll wrap this one up. I was able to talk about this one a little bit quicker than normal, mostly because a lot of it's painful and I didn't want to dwell too much. But thank you so much for being here. And yeah, we'll see you next week for another wrap up. Bye.